request Chandan Awasthi to start.
Good morning, everyone. All those who have spared time to come to IDC and the other members who are joining us from different locations through online mode. I welcome you all to IDC for the Professor Randhir Singh Memorial Lecture Series 2023-24. People who are joining us from different locations include some foreigners, some students from Punjab University who will be joining us from Punjab University, Patiala, other regional centers of these universities, and Chandigarh University. As you have this program scheduled with you, this year we have planned a series of lectures under this series, and which are to be delivered by very eminent scholars from different disciplines. And today we have with us very distinguished sociologist, Professor Dipankar Gupta with us, who will be sharing with us his thoughts on modernization as a sociological concept. On the dais, we have Professor B.S. Ghumal, former Vice Chancellor, Punjab University, Patiala, and Director Research, IDC. Professor Pramod Kumar, Director, IDC. So now, again I welcome you all, and I request Professor Pramod Kumar to introduce Professor Randhir Singh Memorial Lecture Series and welcome the speaker once again.
Thank you, Chandan. Colleagues and friends, we have started this Professor Randhir Singh Memorial Lecture Series under the foundation of Randhir Singh Memorial Academic Foundation, located within the Institute for Development and Communication. The purpose of this series is to initiate a dialogue on diverse subjects, and we have the brief which we are giving to our speakers is that it's a student series where help us to understand the phenomena as if we are our students only. And please don't use jargons to make it difficult for us even to understand. We have lived with the jargons, or rather outlived the jargons now, and the need is now to understand the phenomena in a little more clearer fashion and then try to intervene into it. To those who knew Professor Randhir Singh, they know that he was a passionate teacher of political theory, a political activist, and a scholar. His classes attracted hundreds of students over the years. As a positional scholar, he always prefaced his lecture with where he speaks from. He believed that every speaker inescapably speaks from a particular philosophical standpoint, and that it was ethical to state the same publicly. He was not allowed to teach Marxism in Delhi University at one time, but only Plato. So he learned to teach Marx via Plato. He has authored seminal books such as Reason, Revolution, and Political Theory, 5 lectures in Marxist mode, and Marxism and Socialism and Indian Politics, a view from the left. Having approached him to be the founder member of the Institute for Development and Communication in 1992, he cautioned me that IDC should be a forum to investigate reality not only from Marxist standpoint, but from all competing frameworks. And I was surprised. Once he told me that I will sign only if you commit that you will not make it a center of a particular standpoint and will not allow a dialogue to happen. Randhir Singh Memorial, this foundation was set up to promote the generation and dissemination of pro-people knowledge. The foundation facilitates research, organization of lectures, seminars, and conferences. The importance of Professor Randhir Singh Memorial Lecture Series is that it will act as a reminder and also provide a forum to capture the theoretical foundation for alternate social inquiry. It will also facilitate comprehending various dimensions of changing social order and reinforce the understanding that there have been alternatives in the past and there will be in the future as well. It will also act as a guide to interpreting social reality in the language of people, as has been practiced by Professor Randhir Singh. The lecture series will also be instructive in that it is to build alternatives. It is essential to identify one's own philosophical preconceptions. The memorial series will also reinforce the idea that it is politics which has a primacy and not economics. As Professor Randhir Singh convincingly argued that, I quote, to conceal contradictions of capitalism, all kinds of myth making is on and is ensured that it is not referred to by their proper names but goes by terms like globalization, liberalization, structural adjustment, economic reforms, new economic policy, development and progress to blur social reality for the people. It was with this understanding that he analyzed our nation's complexities after independence. He wrote, to quote, we were very much globalized before 1947, but we didn't like it. And we labeled it as imperialism. And now globalization has become a fad, and with a new phraseology, make in India. Our present day rulers, the successors of Gandhi and Patel, have forgotten that the main thrust of freedom struggle was to reverse the structural logic of globalization that meant the accumulation of wealth in fewer hands and poverty for the people of India. So to do justice to Professor Randhir Singh's revolutionary insight, we could not have a better intellectual than Professor Dipankar Gupta. In one of the conversations, Professor Dipankar Gupta told me that he has written extensively, which one was aware also, but he reminded me that he has written extensively and published extensively by very reputed publishers. But he says now he wants to write for the people and try to understand social reality little differently and in an alternate fashion. So then I thought that, and he in fact wrote a book also which is published, his recent book, Checking Sociology, a cultural reading of policies and politics, which has been published by Akar Books and now it is being printed by Routledge. It has been accepted, I mean they will print it in the next few months. So he is actually, Professor Dipankar Gupta, you all know that he has written a number of books and he believes that communication with the non-academic audience can only help in wider dissemination of research findings in the enrichment of public knowledge. So now it's our honor, I mean, to start this series from Professor Dipankar Gupta, and then we have listed, I mean, another two scholars, Professor Salil Mishra, the Great Indian Experiment, he will be speaking on a model for the world or an aberration. And then Professor Atul Sood will be talking on interrogating foundations of economic policy in contemporary India. And the next, I mean, we hope to cover 11 speakers will be part of this first series. And Professor Upinder Bakshi has also very kindly agreed, I mean, to deliver the next lecture, but we'll finalize the date with him. So the idea is that we are bringing people from different disciplines and trying to understand the social reality from the language of the people and for the people itself. Now I request Professor Dipankar Gupta to start his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Pramod Kumar. I'm very happy to be here and also a little nervous, I must say, because I have old friends who have evolved much more readily than I have. So it will be a while to catch up with them. Professor Randhir Singh has, can I call you Pramod?
Yeah.
You see, the problem really is that he's written more books than I've read. So I have to always be a little careful. So as he said some time back, Professor Randhir Singh was really an icon, a remarkable person, larger than life. And all those who knew him always came away impressed, whether or not we were on his side, didn't matter very much. I know many students in Delhi University when I was there, he was teaching. I wasn't in political science, but no matter which discipline you were in, the shadow of Professor Randhir Singh was cast over that discipline as well. I remember meeting him last in Shimla, in the Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla, and it was really very heartening to meet a person who really was a thoroughbred 100% academic. What really worried him most what really worried him most was how to interact with academics. It was not worldly fame or honors that bothered him as much, but he wanted his works to be understood and read, more than anything else, understood by people. He was very keen on that. And I feel that over the years, as Pramod just said, writing in language that is accessible to people is very difficult to accomplish. Rabindranath Tagore once said that to write simple things simply is very difficult. And I think that is very, very true for most of us. And of course, there are a whole host of scholars who said that if you cannot say something simply, don't say it. Because obviously, you haven't understood the issue at all. So it has been my endeavor in the last 20 years or so to try and simplify things. And I must say, I haven't always succeeded, but I've always succeeded in so much as I've learned something more by myself in trying to simplify matters. Pramod said about the open-mindedness of Professor Randhir Singh. I think that was very typical of a certain category of people in those days, particularly those who were of the left. P.C. Joshi, some of you may recall him very fondly. P.C. Joshi and I were discussing, I was about all of 21 or 22 when I was chatting with P.C. Joshi, and I wanted to impress him. So I said that, Kant is no good, Immanuel Kant is a waste of time. And Joshi heard me patiently, and then he said, I think you should go to bed with the critique of pure reason. Those were his words. So I said, what do you mean? Engels has clarified in Anti-Düring that Kant is a reactionary thinker. He said, I insist you go to bed with the critique of pure reason. Imagine, so it really shook me. And if I have read the critique of pure reason, to whatever extent I've understood, it's primarily because of a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist called P.C. Joshi. So I think people of that era, left politicians, left scholars, and most of the people there who were politicians were also scholars in their time. They had a different approach towards scholarship, towards ideology, and I think all of them stayed far away from dogma. And this is a lesson I think Professor Randhir Singh was the best exponent of in my lifetime. And for that reason, I'm so deeply honored that I've been asked to speak on this occasion. Pramod told me that I should, of course, stay away from jargon, which I fully endorse. But he also wanted me to speak on a subject which would have some resonance in the discipline of sociology. And today I think one of the subjects that really, really matters a lot to all of us, sociologists, political scientists, economists, and lay people, like some of us really are, is the concept of modernity. And if Professor Randhir Singh wants us to lay bare our predilections, our theoretical orientation or predispositions, may I lay bare my own, which basically is this: I don't care where you come from, what your point of view is. My basic issue is, and will be I hope for some time, that are you an exponent, are you a proponent, are you a person who is in favor of the values embedded in citizenship? If you are, then we can have a conversation. Because if you are thinking of citizenship, then citizenship, I think, encompasses the best that democracy and modernity can afford. And I hope to come to that subject a little later, but that is where I am coming from. So I don't care if you're a Marxist or not a Marxist, or a capitalist or a globalist. If you believe in citizenship, and if you think that is your guiding star, then of course that we can have a long discussion, out of which I might learn a lot. So when I think in terms of modernity, well, just to clear my throat on the subject, modernity is not what most of us think it is, and which is the reason why modernity has accumulated so much flack and a lot of ill will and negative reputation. Modernity, first and foremost, which is why I titled this talk, is a matter of relations and not about things. Modernity, as you know, is usually identified with things like fast cars, going abroad, speaking in English, lifestyle, and that's what modernity is supposed to be. And this is something that obviously has raised the hackles not only of ordinary people, but also of theologians and scholars, that this cannot be modernity. Because modernity is not thing, it's not chimney stacks, it's not urbanization, it's not poverty, it's not urban squalor, because these are all things. What else is there about modernity that we should talk about? These things that we can throw around like feeding pigeons, that is not what modernity is all about. You have to rise above that level. And you will be surprised how difficult it is for most of us to even accept the fact that modernity is more than all of this. But many years back, you might recall, a politician's son came to, now I'm going off the guardrails, so please bear with me. A politician's son went to a hotel in Delhi, and because all of this is being recorded, I dare not name the politician or the hotel. The politician's son in Delhi went to a hotel and asked in the discotheque and asked the lady for a dance. She turned him down, and he got so angry, he pulled out his gun and shot the chandelier, which came down in 100 pieces. And in the way stood a man, a poor fellow was hurt as well. And most of us said in the newspapers and elsewhere, this is what modernity does. It's a terrible thing. It has ruined values. It has ruined all ideas of manners. And modernity, therefore, is something to be castigated. And sure enough, this point of view had a lot of takers. Then you have modernity identified with not just urban squalor, with economic degradation, with environmental degradation. What's happening around us is because of modernity. I live in Dehradun these days, and in Dehradun, most of the time you hear old timers like me. I live in an old people's home. Old timers like me keep saying, look what modernity has done. You know, it is destroying forests, destroying the hillside, and as if in the past nothing of this sort ever happened. I once reminded one of these people that, do you know that in America, Northeast America, there's a famous concept called the potlatch. Have you heard of it? Well, potlatch is amongst a community called the Quakers in Northeastern America, and that was a ceremony where you ceremoniously wasted things. You know, the ceremonial wastage. So I would call X tribe to my area, and I would ply those people X tribe with fish, with meat, with fur, with copper sheets, you know, and those people go back overwhelmed and overladen. And the idea was that to impress them that we can do these things. But in this process, they wasted a lot, because the gun had come in the meantime from Birmingham to North America with the white person. The fishing nets had come with the white person. So the native communities that rarely got to eat protein, because the instruments were very rudimentary, rarely got to eat fish. Now we're shooting buffaloes all over the place, catching fish by the tons, and they didn't know what to do. So they began to waste. So wastage is not something that just we do, lots of people do commit this crime. And this is also something that can happen in pre-modern days. So to look at modernity in terms of these things can often mislead you. And which is why I ask myself that no major sociological concept that I know of has been understood in terms of things, because it's always between people, relations between people. Now let's ask the question, what is capitalism? What is capital? Now capital is not just a bunch of money, it's not something you hide under a mattress. Capital is relation between people. And this is not just Marx, by the way, saying it. You think of anybody, you think of Weber, he said it, Schumpeter said it, that capitalism is a relation between people. And Marx put it very succinctly, you might say, that his relation between capital and labor is not just money, it's the kind of organization that we're talking about. So that is what capitalism is. So I think that is a very important point, because so often we discuss capitalism in terms of money, which is not really money. And if you want to understand capitalism in the true sense of the term, you have to go beyond that and look for the relations that this kind of money actually sprouts, which is very different from what we earlier thought was money. Or think of the family. The family is not just father, mother, sister, brother. Family is a relationship between people. And as you know, relationships between people vary in families. So when I talk about a family in, say, North India, or a family in South India, or a family amongst tribals, they're all very different families. In a North Indian modern family, you might say, modern in quotation marks, by the way, or ill-conceived modernity, you might say that in a family today, holding a dinner conversation is a diplomatic event because each one is pulling in a different direction. So it is really fair amount of patience and hard work to pull off a convivial dinner. There are different relations between people in marriages, between North Indian Kanyadan system and the system in South India, which is very, very different, where you have cousin marriages. So everywhere you find the idea of family has to, first of all, anchor itself, not in father, mother, sister, brother, but how do these kin relations interact with one another? And that is what makes for a family. So the word family too, which is seen as quite unambiguous, is actually varied and has multiple manifestations. It's the same thing you might say with feudalism. Feudalism is not simply a question of indolence. It's again a relationship between people, and that changes a lot. Many years ago, I was working on cotton farming in India and Pakistan, and I came to Punjab and I spent a lot of time here, and I found most of the Punjab peasants knew a lot about the seeds, the fertilizers, the pesticides that were necessary for BT cotton. They knew a lot about it. Very, very impressive. I mean, there were also these camps that were held by agricultural universities and so forth, but they knew a lot about all these things. And then I went to Pakistan and I met some of the landlords there. You know, there are no landlords in India. That's the same way. And those landlords said, I asked them the same question. Why are you asking me? The Fazul log over there, ask them. They had no idea what was going on. And so you have land relations that are very, very different in character, depending upon where you are. So it's just not a term that is important. What is important is how you relate to other people. It is that relationship that's interesting and significant for sociologists. For, as I said to you, I can't think of any term that actually is built only on things. The very famous discussion that sociologists have almost all the time and keeps them awake at night is that of religion. And religion is not in sociology, and all of you know that, but let me reiterate. Religion in sociology is not the thing called theology. It is not theology. A specialist in the sociology of religion, like M.N. Srinivas, the great anthropologist, was not really a specialist in Hinduism, but he was a specialist in the sociology of religion because he saw in great detail and with great perspicacity what is the relationship between different actors in the religious realm. That was important to him. It was not theology as such, because if you were to talk about theology, I think all sociologists and anthropologists would make a dog's meal out of it, because they have no idea of what theology is, and neither should they, because that is not their speciality. The reason why Max Weber's famous book, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, has been so famous, and justly so, is because it was not about theology. It was about aspects of theology and the relationships that they let loose in the relationship between people in the making of capitalism. There are people who agree with them, there are many who don't agree with them, but that was his position. Unfortunately, the famous saying, opium of the people, you might recall, in German, in the Jewish question, Marxist, that has become like a thing. But if you look at the entire quotation, it's not a thing. It's the hope of the hopeless, the sigh of the oppressed, you know, the something else, the lack of something, conscience in the something word. Then it says the opium of the people. So it is all of this, and it is the opium of the people. At the end of all of this, you realize it is not just something you take and become insensate, but it is a way of relating to others that this word opium is now signifying. So my point really is this, that I cannot think of any major sociological concept that I have handled with, I have read about, I'm sure it is true for you as well, which is not really about relations between people. Those relations are central, and without those relations, the concept is no longer sociological. So if we are going to think in terms of modernity, we have to ask the question that what are the relational aspects? Or we are just making a pig's ear of the whole thing. It means nothing. We're just talking about things and throwing them around. like birdseed, but what do they mean? I don't know. And I'm so surprised that for so long, modernity has earned a bad name because it is linked to things. Now, when I said that I was a proponent and an advocate and a believer in citizenship, I was not being fully honest because I believe first and foremost in modernity. And the other thing which I hope will happen and stay with me forever is that I want to remain forever young in my head. You know, it's grey and so forth, forget that. But inside the head, I want you to stay young. And the way you stay young is to stay with citizenship and try to be modern as possible, not in terms of things, not in terms of fast cars, not in terms of going abroad, not in terms of spending money recklessly, but in keeping relationships between people at the modern realm. And that is why I'd like to ask you the question, what do you think make for the characteristics of modernity? Having said all that I said, modernity is not this and not that, and so on and so forth. You are obviously asking the question, well, if it is not all these things, then what on earth is it? Well, in my view, modernity has one major feature, and that is intersubjectivity. That is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, to see the world from a different perspective. Rawls used the term, John Rawls used the term, a common horizon. To be able to see yourself through the eyes of the other, to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. You know, Groucho Marx, the famous comedian, not Karl Marx. Groucho Marx had a quip on this. He said that if you're going to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, make sure the size fits. We're talking about seeing the world from a different perspective. And this intersubjectivity, as you know, has been written about a great deal in the works of Edmund Husserl, for example, the phenomenologist, which is all about seeing the world with somebody else's eyes. It's been done Habermas, he's written about it the same way. In fact, if you were to ponder over this question, you will find it very interesting that till the time of Hegel, Western philosophy of all varieties, I will less a philosophy of all varieties and less include Indian philosophy as well. I'm not saying Hindu philosophy. I'm saying Indian philosophy as well. And the Upanishads. If you look at the whole range of thinkers at that time, you will find that their major emphasis, West or East, in my view, was about understanding the self. The self was very important. In Kant too, the critique of pure reason that P.C. Joshi wanted me to read, a lot of it is about the self. How do you make categories, for example? That was how the brain works. How the self, sees the outside world and perceives reality. This is what he was talking about. Almost every philosopher of that time, you can think of anybody, almost without exception, I may not know one or two, who thought about the self as the most important digit of philosophy. Even Kant. But Kant later on, in his later works, moved away from that. And he was beginning to think of self and the other. And by the time Hegel came, and afterwards, it was always self another, self another, self another. No longer did any philosopher talk about the self. That was not important. In Indian philosophy, the only place where I found this aspect powerful, but not central, but powerful enough, was in the Isha Upanishad. I didn't find it anywhere else. Where the Isha Upanishad says, the greatest source of sorrow is to think that your sorrow is different from the sorrow of other people. That was one pregnant line in the Isha Upanishad. And I think that somehow presages an idea of intersubjectivity, but I'm not sure how deliberate or how thoroughbred that particular phrase is. But Kant, for example, the later Kant and Hegel and anybody after that, Weber, Marx, Habermas, pick up anybody, Rawls, anybody, nobody talks about the self any longer. They all talk about the self and other, self and other. Do you want to understand yourself? Look at the other. This is the way in which the presentation of self in everyday life, famous book, is about not the self, but how the self is presented to others in everyday life. So, in my view, the understanding of intersubjectivity has become almost central to most of contemporary thinking, and we should just consciously accept it and push it further as far as we can. Intersubjectivity is about seeing the world through the eyes of the other. But there is a major question mark here. Can all of us do it easily? Is it something that is natural? Is it a mother's milk ideology? Or is it something that is cultivated? In fact, most of us who talk about self and other and intersubjectivity are talking of a rarefied methodological perspective, which is there in Husserl, in Habermas, in Levinas. But these are very conscious attempts to be intersubjective. But to what extent can we be intersubjective on a reflexive fashion? In what extent can intersubjectivity become a habit? That, I think, is where the rub lies. And many of us will find that difficult, but that is where real modernity lies. How to be intersubjective on an everyday basis, on an everyday relationship. And that is something which I think is very hard to accomplish. However, it is a goal that we must keep in mind, because intersubjectivity is about other people, and that is why intersubjectivity separates ethics from morality. The idea of ethics is really, again, a very modern phenomenon, not morality. Because morality is something that you can privatize. And I must say, Kant and Hegel both made this point clearly, but Hegel more clearly than Kant in the philosophy of right, that morality can be privatized. I can say, for example, I keep my wife in the kitchen, barefoot. And that's moral because that's what the books say. I want my daughters to be married at the age of 9. That's moral, that's what the books say. I want my workers in my factory to treat me like their father. So that is Indian culture. Right? But these are all moral statements which I have privatized. And I feel very good being moral. In fact, I feel really, really satisfied if me as a moral person is living amongst immoral people. My morality gets a boost. So I say, look at me. Here I am, a thoroughbred vegetarian, and these barbarians around me eat meat. And I feel very good about it. So morality is something you can do on your own. You can be moral on your own. You can be this wonderful lotus in a sea of mud. Right? And that is what morality is. However, you cannot be ethical alone. Ethics always means other people. A very quick example will be that of driving in the streets. And there you find ethics to the top. Now you might be a first-class driver, you can probably turn your car on a coin, but you may have no morality, you may have no ethics, because you don't care for the other people. So when I often tell my driver, my taxi driver, whoever, please put your blinker on, but the person says, but I know this is the way to go. I say, it's all right for you, but it helps the other person if you put your blinker on. So ethics is about not yourself, but about the other people. And this is something which, I was groping around for the light switch till I read Levinas. And Emmanuel Levinas said, and he turned the switch on for me, he said that ethics is about other people. It's not about yourself. Hegel said that Western law has taken a lot from Roman law. Roman law and Western law, a lot of concordance between the two. Not just coincidence, it's concordance. But he said the problem with Roman law was that according to Roman law, the father, stroke husband, was the owner of the children. So what he did to children was his business and none of yours. So that was a moral position in Roman law, but that is a position that we will not consider ethical today. We might say, even today some people might say, but they won't to the extent of chopping off the children's heads, but they will say that my children are mine and they better listen to me. Right? So you will find in Christian gospel, for example, the statement, do unto others as others would do unto you. Do you agree with it? Yes, yes, yes? No, it's not good enough. To do unto others what others would do unto you is not good enough, because let us say I like to bribe. Would I like others to bribe me? Let us say I'm a sycophant. Would I like others to kowtow before me? Or, as Hegel said, that if I want others to sympathize with me, and I call that morality, then I should ask the judge to release me from prison, because the judge doesn't want to be in prison, so he wouldn't like me to be in prison. So you see, you end up in these kind of philosophical and conceptual wrangles, if you say something like, do unto others as others would do unto you. This was, of course, in Matthew's exegesis on the gospel. But soon after Matthew came Luke, and I think Luke was a smart guy, and Jesus should have given him more prominence. Luke said that, even sinners can do good. Even sinners can lend money to people. So what is the business about doing good to others because we want to you? Because it makes no sense at all. So the whole idea which was propagated with such efficacy by Matthew, and I'm sorry to say, this has been repeated ad nauseum by so many people in India. Some people mistakenly say that Gandhi also said it. Gandhi never said it. But they mistakenly say that Gandhi said this. They also attribute to Gandhi the thing that if you be the change you want to be. Gandhi never said that either, But there's some of these aphorisms that are attributed to Gandhi, but this one in particular has a wide currency. And people think this is it, you've got the mantra right. But the fact is that this is wrong. Because do unto others what others do unto you does not work. And Hegel said that, before Hegel, Kant said it too. But Kant said it quietly, sotto voce, you might say. Kant said that we should have categorical imperatives. And categorical imperatives is a big word, but simply means that whatever I want, or whatever you think is right, should be universally applicable. So I would like something to be done to me which is universally applicable to everybody. The universal applicability is what is important in what he believed to be a right ethical position, and not a moral position. The moral position is something that he was very against. So Kant said and Hegel said, I think, very perspicaciously, that it is easier to be moral than to be ethical. To be moral is very easy. I can spin up a moral yarn in the top of a hat and I say instantly, it's moral for me to sit on the left of Brahma. Whether you accept or not. It's my moral position. And I hold on to it. So you can be moral on your own, you can be moral for the wrong things by your standards, but if you're ethical, it is always about other people, and that is the relationship that should be foregrounded. So morality and ethics is something that intersubjectivity brings to the fore. We would not have thought about it clearly now if we had not thought about intersubjectivity, and if we had not thought about the relationship between self and other, which dominates all of contemporary thinking, no matter where in the world. And it did not dominate thinking no matter where in the world in the past. I mean, there's no point saying that Indian philosophy was not good enough. No philosophy was good enough. Every philosopher, all through the ages, had talked about the self. Either self in terms of your own fulfillment, or self uniting with God. In Chandra Yoga Upanishad is about the man uniting with Brahma, or whatever. But self and other, this is something which is very, very modern, and I would like to emphasize that. I hope you appreciate what I'm saying on this subject. So this is one of the most important things in modernity, is that do we believe that the self is a creation of the interaction between self and other. It doesn't come on its own. People have used this phrase quite commonly, that our thinking is based on our way of life. And they use it happily, not realizing that the first person who said it was Karl Marx. Before Karl Marx, nobody said this. It's Karl Marx who was the first person to say that thinking, your way of life, is not built inside you and your past and your self-reflection, your reflection, but it is the outcome of the people you live with. That interaction brings out the idea of the self. So thought is not something independent of other people. But today we don't even think of taking Marx as irrelevant as saying the history of hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. It's so irrelevant to say footnote 1, Karl Marx Manifesto, right? Likewise, to say that your consciousness depends upon your reality is ridiculous to say footnote 2, Karl Marx. Everybody knows it so well, it's so deeply assimilated, it's part of your metabolism, so why make a show of it? So there you are. The idea of self and other, the idea of ethics is something which is very modern and intersubjective, which is why I think one should pay close attention to it. So then, finally, big question. What are the correlates of modernity? What are the correlates of modernity? I have thought of a few. One is that, remember, ethics and morality. One major outcome of modernity, or consequence of modernity, or if one uses a bigger word, correlates of modernity, is that in a modern society there are no Mahatmas. Mahatmas. Because there's no need for Mahatmas. You need Mahatmas only when the society is not ethical. Then you need a Mahatma to stand up and do something for poor people. I mean, you're walking down the streets and you find beggars, you find somebody lying in the ditches, you go past All India Institute of Medical Sciences and you find people sleeping outside the pavement for months on end. The line in front of the blood work for cancer treatment is shamefully long. I mean, imagine standing in the sun, you're sick, you're standing in the sun for hours to get your blood work done so that you can get the chemotherapy for your cancer treatment. This is where you need Mahatmas. Mahatma will come and help you out. And these Mahatmas some of them of course begin their life with wanting to be Mahatmas, but most of them, the good ones, don't want to be Mahatmas, but they are propelled by ethical considerations. I think more than ethical, sometimes it's even aesthetic compulsion. It's just so disgusting to see all of this. But you will not find a Mahatma in the West quite as easily as you would find in countries like ours. You throw a brick here, you hit a Mahatma straight away. There's so many of them. In fact, Mahatmas prosper in a society which is not quite modern. So if you see a lot of Mahatmas around, you know right away that we are looking at an unmodern society as of now. Sometimes, of course, we also make the mistake of looking at the number of women leaders that our countries have thrown out. India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Malaysia, and we say, look how modern we are, we have a woman leader. But all these women leaders, I think I might say, in fact, all of them, they are all leaders because they've inherited the political mantle from their male ancestor. In all these cases. I can't think of any case, Sirimava Bandanayak, Guptas, whoever, the Begums and fighting away in Bangladesh, wherever you go, they have inherited the mantle of their male ancestor, husband. Sons don't inherit quite as easily political mantle, they inherit money, but not the political mantle, because in a democracy, a son is supposed to live in a man's world, and the son never measures up to the man. A woman is not supposed to measure up in this kind of situation, so you can lavish on the woman all kinds of sentiments and say, this woman represents that leader. Right? It's like, I'm sorry to say, it's like a piece of cloth that you color into a flag and you invest in the sentiments. So if you see a woman leader, please don't think you become one. Ask the question, what kind of leader is she? How has she come to the fore? That I think is very important. But one of the best rules of modernity, in my view, and which can be used as a guide to everything that we do around us, is sport. Sport is a very modern phenomenon. Before modernity, there was no sport. There were games. Games are not sport. Games are when I played a game in the nobleman's house, or I played a game as tribal people, where the rules were made up as you went along, and you had to be well-mannered. You couldn't let your nobleman patron lose in the badminton game. The person had to win. In many tribal societies where they play games, nobody wins. They keep playing and keep playing, eventually they say draw. Right? But sport is so important because sport rules are framed. And these rules apply to everybody. The sportsman on the field, or sportswomen on the field, the referee, the audience, they all know the rules. You cannot make the rules up as you go along. That's written, known, and well publicized. Everybody knows it. The spectators know it, as well as the referee, as well as the sportspeople. They all know the rules. And in sports, you always win or lose in the open. You can't hide it. It's out there in the open. You know, it's very interesting. For example, the rules of cricket. The rules of cricket were framed in 1784, or thereabouts, give or take a year. 1784. George III was then ruling Britain. It was framed, these rules were framed at that time. The last sport for which rules were framed was I think, in basketball. In basketball, that was the last of it. So all these sports had rules laid out which you could not transgress. So if Michael Jordan jumps 3 feet or 4 feet and stays stationary for a nanosecond and then spurts another foot, defying gravity, right? That is because that's allowed because Michael Jordan is not breaking any rule. When Sachin Tendulkar hits that cover drive that everybody loves, it's so wonderful, but it is not breaking any rule, but he does it best. Now, if you don't have rules, this is important. If you don't have rules, you cannot innovate. You only innovate when you're bound and pressured by rules. If you don't have rules, there's no innovation. Remember that old game, that joke used to hear about W.G. Grace? The first ball, he was bowled out, and he said, I can't be bowled out, my mother's watching. So it had to be done again. Now, you can't have that in sport. Those rules are inflexible, they're there. And if you didn't have the rules, Michael Jordan would be pressured to do that. Tendulkar would be pressured to hit the way he hit the ball. Nobody would be, you would not be pressured to be a good entrepreneur if you didn't have rules. There was this famous ditty about Robert Kennedy, who was supposed to be, this is an old ditty of the 60s. Doesn't mean much today. But the 60s, the story was Robert Kennedy, Bobby owned a football field. Bobby owned a football field in Boston, perhaps. Bobby lost, but Bobby wouldn't yield. But Bobby said, what the heck, I own this football field. Right? So that was not sport. That's a game. And if you look at all the manners and customs of medieval times, it's all about how you must tilt your preferences to suit your patron. That is very important. What changed, however, was during Victorian times. In Victorian times, a very famous book by Professor John Hill is called Manners and Customs of the Victorian Age, or words to that effect. That book was written kind of forward by the then Vice President of America. That book wasn't one of those rare books that I write, nobody knows exist. But that book was flying off the shelves. It was so popular. And you know what that book said about Victorian manners and morals? It said, a true Victorian gentleman will never show off his belongings and his possessions. If he has extravagant appurtenances and is visiting the home of somebody who's not so well off, he should leave his carriage behind and walk to the person's house. If the gentleman has gone abroad, he should not drop names like he's been to Paris or Rome or whatever. He should not even drop foreign words. In other words, a middle class ethics was being framed in Victorian times.
I know.
So anyhow, so this is what good manners is. Good manners is how to change places. You can't stand apart. Snobbery and good manners are two different things. Snobbery is when the elite class, quote unquote, will never tell you what it is that makes them elite. For example, how to eat a cucumber sandwich. They won't tell you that. But if you don't eat it properly, they'll know you are not one of them. They will not tell you how to pick up a cup of tea. Because if they tell you, then you will know, and then that difference will be gone. When I was in London, my colleague there told me that you will never find a posh, middle-class, upward person in a London furniture store. Why? If you're a London furniture store, you're an upwardly mobile person or a migrant like us, but a proper English gentleman or lady will never be seen in a furniture store, which means then you have not inherited furniture. So if you were to go to a proper posh middle class upwards gentle family, you will find all kinds of odds and ends, chairs with their legs broken, a sofa with the spring coming out, but they'll say very proudly, that is the chair my grandfather sat in when he shot a tiger in Burma, and things like that. So snobbery again is something you don't know. So when we go abroad, we have this matching curtains and matching sofa set, and then we ask ourselves, why are our English friends making fun of us? Obviously, they know you're not inherited anything. You bought them from the store. So snobbery is something which is very different from good manners. And good manners is what ethics is all about. Good manners is modernity. Snobbery is not modernity. And some of us think that snobbery is modernity. It is not. As the same gentleman told me once, if you want to fight racism in Britain, out-snob the racists. You out-snob the racists, they are neutralized. So the real thing is that snobbery is not good manners. Sport is good manners. In sport, you cannot be a snob. You have to fight by the rules. It's impossible to win otherwise. And I keep thinking of Muhammad Ali and the many boxing bouts I've seen on television. I've never seen it live. And I find that in spite of all the braggadocio prior to the fight, in the ring, they're observing the rules of the game. That is very, very important. In the ring, you can't hide the fact that you have lost this match or you won the match. This is something that happens in the ring. The other great indicator of modernity is fashion. Fashion is a great indicator of modernity. Now let me distinguish two things. Fashion is not expensive garments. Fashion is not showing off. If you are fashionable, if you are in fashion, this is Coco Chanel. Have you heard of Coco Chanel? Coco Chanel, I think, was the person who made the big difference in fashion. And I'm a great devotee of Coco Chanel. Coco Chanel said that if I were to walk by, and Professor Shager would say that, you know, his trousers are pretty good, then I'm not in fashion. If I were to walk by, and Professor Shager were to say, Dipankar is looking good, no mention of trousers, no mention of shirt, top hat, coat, sunglasses, nothing. That means I am in fashion because my clothes are not important. I am coming through. This is what fashion is supposed to mean. So before Coco Chanel came, Coco Chanel was the second decade of the 20th century. Before she came, what was fashion what was style in the West? There was no fashion, style. You know, ostrich feathers, plumes, brocade, silk, gems encrusted in your clothes. So when you walked in, you say, oh, that person is rich. That person is, you know, powerful or whatever. Then Chanel came, and what did she do? She started this little black dress, as you heard. She got rid of everything, all the frummery. And it was a little black dress which meant a skirt, a top, and a waistcoat. You take the waistcoat off, and you go to work, put the waistcoat on and a rose, and you go for cocktails. Easy. You know, you catch a bus, get into a train, go to parties, go to work, all with a little black dress. And that was very important, with no gold, no feathers, nothing of the kind. It was just neat cut. And the cut became important. When artificial silk came to the world, the fashion designers of Paris and Europe were delighted because they said that now we can make clothes that the ordinary person can wear because artificial silk came. If you look at any of the major designers of clothes, fashion, you will find that they're always catering to what is called the middle class. In the Chanel's company, they told me once that in India you will not have fashion for a long time. I said, why not? He said, because in India you don't walk. You take a car and you go to a party, you take a car and go to office, you take a car and come back home. Unless you walk, there's no fashion. Unless you see other people see you. You can't have fashion. That's why in India, as I learned later on, we don't have fashion, we have style. Look at all the great fashion designers, and now I won't mention names. All the great fashion designers, look at the clothes they make. They make the money out of wedding trousers. They make the money out of designs which are so elaborate and lavish that nobody can wear them in everyday life. They make it something which is encrusted with jewelry and metals of all kinds that you can take and make it stand on its own. You can step away, the stuff will stand. Now that is not what fashion is. They will use Rajas, Maharajas, Rajputs, etc., those models for contemporary design. No fashion designer today would ever do that. You know, there was a jacket which was this high, cut up with the sleeve, made of an iridescent material, and with cross with that, and that was fashioned by Chanel. And within 3 months, it was available on the streets of Paris because everybody could make it. And that didn't mean that Chanel was upset. They were happy. They said, we are happy when our clothes are vulgarized. The moment our clothes are picked up by Zara or by H&M, it shows that Chanel is successful. Now, I would say this is what fashion really means. And we don't understand it because we think of fashion as an elite category, but fashion really should be something which is between people, middle class people, ordinary people who exchange clothes, look at one another and say, well, you know, we are all in fashion. As Chanel would say, what is your favorite color? And you said, the favorite color is the color that you want. That's the best color. And so it depends on you. This is also what Karl Mannheim said about secularism. He said in secularism, it's not about the church being displaced by the state. Secularism is when you say, prove it to me. That is what secularism is. So what can happen is, you can have the church out of the picture, but you can have an absolutist monarch who is not religious. And you will say this is secularism, but it's not. Because an absolute monarch, or ruler, or dictator, or tin pot, whatever, will not let you think on your own. Not let you ask the question, prove it to me. And this is what secularism truly means, that you must prove it to me. However, I must end by saying one thing, and that is this, that in democracy, citizenship encapsulates all these views. In citizenship, the most basic principle is this, and this was articulated by T.H. Marshall, that citizenship confers an equality of status upon which structures of inequality can be built. So you can be different as much as you like, but to begin with, you must all have the equality of status. You must have the same education, the same facilities of health, you must have housing, energy. That is common. And then you can waste your life, you can spend it in bars, as George Best, the great footballer, British footballer, said that I have spent a lot of time in bars and women and fast cars. Some of it I wasted playing football. So you can do that. You can do whatever you want, but you cannot say I didn't get the basics. You got the basics. You could be an entrepreneur, you could be a sportsman, you could be a waster. Magnus Carlsen, the great chess player, he was asked, how come your son is so good? He was 18 years old, 19 when he became the chess champ. His father said, he was so good because he didn't worry about his future. It was all provided for. So he could play chess all the time. So that's very important, you see, that citizenship is the one, it's not about voting. Voting is a thing. Voting is a thing, it's not a relationship. Citizenship is where the equality of status is base upon which you can build inequality. So it's not to say everybody is equal. That's ridiculous. What we are saying is everybody is equal at base, so now I can build whatever kind of inequality that I want to, come up with. That's my idea. That's what I want to do. Modernity never ends. It's a continuous quest. If you say modernity has ended, you are unmodern. The biggest mistake Marx and Hegel before Marx made, was that they said the dialectic stops with us. That's the biggest mistake. Dialectics, Fichte was the person who first thought about dialectics. His thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, not Hegel. It's Fichte, and Marx took it from Hegel. But Fichte said thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is a continuous human progress, human effort. So just when you think that everything is done, I've reached the top, another thesis pops up, another antithesis happens. It goes on and on. Another wall comes up, another barrier to be overcome. So modernity like that, democracy like that, never ends. You can never say, I'm finally a democratic country. Just think 50, 60, 70 years back. Who ever thought that the question of gay marriages would come up? No one thought. Who ever thought 100 years back that women would vote? What? Women vote? No one thought. Who thought that migrants should vote? Nobody thought. Who thought that scheduled castes should have equal rights? Nobody thought. So democracy has an doesn't have habit of picking up things that nobody thought of earlier. It keeps digging and finding new ore. Modernity is like that. It keeps digging and finds new ore. And I hope that I'll keep digging and I won't dig my grave. Thank you.
Friends, after this thought-provoking lecture, there must be some observation, questions from the audience, because he has made, given you lots of space to ask questions, from unmodern to modern. Then he say modernity is continuous. So then there must not be any unmodern at any time. But anyhow, I think, let's start, anybody who wants to make a Mr. Spodakar.
Firstly, thank you, Dipankar Gupta, for the very actually very inviting. The definition, and as Dr. Kumar said,
Mic. लंबे वाला पीछे गया नहीं पीछे 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 है वो नहीं जो मैं बोला था उसके लिए
Yeah. What I would like to observe is the domain in which I and Professor Pramod Kumar have worked very closely. And I think together we achieved some results also, which is delivery of service. So, what I would say the medieval attitude towards functioning of public office holder was kind of base that if I as a deputy commissioner or as a subedar or as a mansabdar gave something to a citizen, it was because I am a good person, I am favorably inclined to him, and I choose to give it. The modern concept, on the other hand, is based on rules that we have been lucidly. That I don't do it because I'm a good person, I don't do it because I am feeling good about that other person, or that other person has done something to make me happy. But because there are rules which say that I must provide that service for that to that person. And I think the major difference that we find when we travel abroad in the so-called modern societies and where we feel we are not modern enough, is the absence of this fact. That here it is still person-driven to a very large extent. While in the modern society, it is more system-driven, rule-driven, and you can see it in various ways. And then one more thing, since I mentioned going abroad, one keeps reading about and learning about various other countries without distinguishing. My impression is that this concern for the other, which the reciprocity is strongest in a few parts of the world. One is in North Europe, Scandinavian countries and neighboring ones, and it starts going down as you move southwards. It's very low in our country. There is more status-driven or personal relationship-driven, and not driven by genuine concern for the person. Or you see some of it in New Zealand or Canada or some such places. And one Asian country which really does extremely well and better than Western countries also is Japan, and which is again a total contrast to what happens in China. So it's an interesting, I wondered about this and I would like to understand if you can, I would be very grateful if you can guide me to relevant literature as to how is it that these countries evolve these values. The one thing which holds, which is common among all of them, that they are so-called civilized within quotations very late. Scandinavian countries had urbanization only during the last millennium. Canada and New Zealand were settled much later. And Japan emerged from liberalism into modernity in the blink of an eye. Yeah. So, with that, one thing I would be very grateful if you
Yeah, then Professor Bagaya, Prof. Philosophy.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. Always, very illuminating. There was one question through and through I was thinking about the nature of intersubjectivity. You said Husserl onwards, it became a kind of project to unpack. So how do you really explain the Marxian intersubjectivity and the existential intersubjectivity? Like Hegel would be saying something else, but the very moment we go to Kierkegaard, Sartre, and many others, and what kind of impact does it have on citizenship and the whole project of modernity, which is ethical normative, but is also a kind of quote unquote value. Thank you.
Dr. Rindar.
Yes, sir, my question is this, that rather than self in the present time, there are not the important, more important are not the communities, because in the coming times, we are have the more community feelings rather than the self.
Professor Jaskiran, it's not
I
bad.
think I have allowed it carrying on.
Yeah, we know. We want to record you.
Actually, I am very interested in what you have to say about subjectivity, and I cede my question to many other people who are asking that question. I just had a clarification on your chronology for sport. So do you not consider wrestling a sport? Kingdoms were lost and won on that in ancient times. Olympics themselves definitely had roots which goes back to AD, maybe 7th, 8th century AD. So I'm just I'm trying to understand the connection that you're making between sport as a modern phenomenon because it has roots. I think it has always had roots. You know? And the other clarification was about ethics and etiquette. I got lost somewhere there because I think etiquette has less to do, has definitely a lot to do with the times we live in, and ethics may have some hangover of morality in it, or depending on just the you can understand who sets the tone. So just a clarification, I may have misunderstood.
Okay, let's start with your question. This is something which has been an issue. Why do certain societies appear to be or are more intersubjective and citizenship better practiced than other societies? This is a question that has bedeviled all of us. I found a way out of it, and I wrote a book on the subject, and I called it The Citizen Elite. What do they call it? The Revolution from Above, and something. Now the point I was making was, after I retired, I took early retirement, and I didn't know what to do. So I was reading around aimlessly, you might say, a version of intellectual jaywalking. And then it occurred to me that all the major advances in democracy, beginning from, let's say, Benjamin Disraeli, before that, Palmerston and others, I found most of the major advances in democracy did not happen because of a groundswell of people protesting. It did not happen. It happened because some leaders felt this should be done, even though there was no demand for it.
Even slavery.
Yeah, slavery, Wilberforce and so forth. Some people said it should be done. There was no demand for it. So for example, when child labor was abolished, the poor people of Britain, of London and Manchester, they said, why is it being abolished? They said that I worked as a child, my son is no Prince of Wales, why can't he work? So they were going against the popular trend and saying that we must do this. If you look at women's rights, the suffragette movement, again, there were few women, and they too were very elite women, who started this movement for women's rights. There was no mass upsurge. Even the right for universal franchise, not universal, but in decreasing the qualifications, was again led by certain people who thought it was a good thing to do. This famous person, he was against the Corn Law. Robert Peel was against the Corn Law, and Robert Peel was one of the richest landowners of England. And Robert Peel was against it, and his relations said, what's wrong with you? You're going against our interests. But Robert Peel said no. He lost the election. Then came Russell after him. Then Robert Peel came again, and he won the election. So it was not as if they were doing things that people wanted and they capitalized upon it. In fact, all great things that democracy has done is because some leaders said this is the right thing to do. For example, Mahatma Gandhi said, I am against untouchability. Now, if you went like you and I with a notebook and asked questions, are we for or against, there'd be many more for untouchability at that time. But he said, I'm against untouchability, and he fought for it because he felt it was the right thing to do by the norms of citizenship, not by any other norm. The Hindu Marriage Act, as you know, was bitterly contested. Again, it was certain leaders, Ambedkar, Nehru to begin with, Ambedkar then became upset, Nehru and others somehow saw it through. They pushed it through. So I'm telling this story to you in some detail because it was really very important for me. I was talking to the then Spanish ambassador about this, and he said, you want to see this in practice today, go to the Basque part of Spain, where you will find leaders making a difference. And I was lucky enough to go there, and I was so surprised. The first minister of Basque country, when they separated from Franco, when Franco died actually, he told me, I asked him, why did you do all these things? Did you hear it from the people? You know what he told me? Any Democrat who says, I'm doing this because I'm listening to the people, is a liar. You do something because you think it is right, and you let the people judge you in the election time. You know? So the question you asked me is all through the post-World War period, to World War period, even before that in Austria-Hungary Empire, the Red Austria movement after the First World War, when typhus was invading parts of Russia, you had people coming up and saying we must have a universal health system. After 1947, it was quite widespread. In none of these cases were the masses involved. Leaders said it should be a good idea to have it. This was true of every place. In fact, what is interesting is, when we ask people today, why don't you have universal health? Very often people say, we don't have the money. But the interesting thing is, wherever universal health and universal education is brought in, it was brought in when those countries were at their poorest. That's where it happened. In Canada, for example, it happened when Ontario was the poorest part, Quebec and Ontario were the poorest part of Canada after the war. That is where it happened first. You know? So there's no reason why, these Basque people told us, we didn't have any money. But we said, whatever it is, health and education number one. We don't care. We'll starve everything else. We want these two to become. And today, you know what? Basque Spain, that part, is equal to Germany in terms of innovation, number two in Europe in terms of HDI. It was the poorest part of Spain. Spain was the poorest part of Europe. When I told this story to some bankers in Brussels, you know what they told me? You are lying. It can't be true. But it is true.
How much time did all this take?
Amazing. 1980, and I saw all this change by 2005. 1980 was when Franco died. 2005, I first went to Basque, went again in 2013. It was just incredible. Today, there are people are telling me that you are singing a song which has outrun its life, because young people today are not quite as committed. I don't know. But what I saw was 2013. So 1980 to 2005 was the first time I saw it, then 2013 the second time, 2013 more deliberately, because I went with that charter in mind. The second, so this is it. So when you see certain countries being more citizenship oriented, it's not because people are naturally citizens. So it is very difficult to be one, and you need leadership to do it. You don't have good leaders, you don't have good democracy. Democracy is only good as its leaders are. Otherwise, there's no good. During the Cold War period, democracy did not move an inch, because we were saying my dictator versus your dictator. You're fighting that fight. Only recently did the rights of lesbians, gays, etc. come up. It never came up. But before that, nobody even thought about it. And today we're all thinking about it. So you see what democracy does? It keeps churning up new things. Citizenship, intersubjectivity, and Kierkegaard. See, Kierkegaard is not my favorite in this realm. Because in Kierkegaard, the idea of, as you know, the idea of leap of faith, is something which is more like, well, in a way, if I say so. For example, these Basque leaders, we often said ours was a leap of faith. When we said we were going to go for health and education. So we had that. There was no statistics, there was no study, there was no nothing. They just felt this is the right thing to do. So they did it. But yes, you see, Maurice Merleau-Ponty would be my favorite in that stream of thinking. Because he was a person who was both, a phenomenologist, deeply impressed by Husserl, also a Marxist. You might also say he was a bit of a gadfly. He rode on everything that was around. One thing which I forgot to mention was relationship in modernity between the person, the individual, and the community. So very often people say a modern person is not religious. a modern person has no community ties. I think that is absolutely incorrect. Just ask yourself, have you heard of Michael Madhusudan Dutt? In Bengal, he was very anglicized and westernized. And you heard of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, obviously. Now you put the two together. So Michael Madhusudan Dutt, the story is probably caricatured story, that he always wore a top hat and suit, even in the blistering heat of Calcutta. And when his mother was dying, this is a lovely story, this is probably untrue. When his mother was dying, his mother called him and said that, I'm dying, because Michael Madhusudan didn't believe in Indian gods and goddesses. She said to him that I'm dying, so why don't you go to this temple, the Kali temple, and pray for me. So the story goes that Michael goes to the Kali temple, stands in front of the goddess, takes off his hat and says, "Good morning, ma'am." And then you have Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who was very Bengali in visage, temperament, clothes, language. Now, who would you say is more modern? I would say it is Ishwar Chandra. Because Ishwar Chandra brought about the emancipation of women, widow remarriage, women's education. Michael was emancipation of the self, primarily, right? He was emancipated. He ate beef, or whatever. He was just free of these constraints. But I think this Vidyasagar was more modern in my book for these reasons. And that's why I would say that community. Why should a person be anti-community and anti-religious? I don't know. If you're modern, you can be both. There's no reason at all. As long as your religious beliefs and your community identity doesn't contrast with that of citizenship. If citizenship is kept alive, no problem. I would, for example, argue, after reading a recent book by a good friend of mine, that Lala Lajpat Rai was a very modern person. You see, we were taught to believe that because of Arya Samaj, this, that, the other, his credentials as a secular were kind of doubtful. I don't think so at all after reading Lala Lajpat Rai in detail. He never compromised on citizenship. He never compromised on the freedom movement. He never compromised on any of those things. But he believed in Arya Samaj. So I can believe in Hinduism. But if Hinduism doesn't go against the tenets of citizenship, fine. But when it does, citizenship takes precedence. Otherwise, I am a Hindu, I am a Sikh, I am whatever. When I go to a Sikh temple, I'm overwhelmed. I go to the Golden Temple. I go to any Gurdwara, I find it uplifting. But I'm not a religious person the same way. But it happens. What can you do? Let me ride. Because it doesn't go against my notions of citizenship. And that is very, very important. About sport. You see, in the past you had sport. Can you do that? Yeah, you had sport. Now, I don't know about which kind of period you're talking about, but let's take sport as more spectacular best. Games. Let's take the gladiators, the Roman period. The gladiator, the Roman period, the rules, you must believe me, the rules were never followed. The rules depended upon the emperor, who was seeing it, and who should win. Those things were clearly marked out. Sometimes there was a misunderstanding, and then the organizers had to pay for it. So the rules of gladiatorship were not as clear-cut today as the rules of wrestling are. Today's rules of wrestling are not the rules of the akhada. The rules of wrestling framed by the wrestling body. So you can't have disparate rules. You must have one rule that applies to the entire world, or entire world of wrestling. Wherever you have wrestlers, Greco-Roman, whatever, these rules will apply, and everybody should know these rules. So in my book, I would say that there is a difference between our kind of sport and their kind of games. There's a difference in that. Finally, I would also add that etiquette has a lot to do with ethics. Etiquette and morality don't really go together. Etiquette and snobbery don't go together. Etiquette about things about other people. In sociology, we have this, in all of social science, we have this distinction between emic and etic. Etic is external, observable, knowable, can be written about, can be transmitted. Not emic is what I feel deep down inside. So, in many ways, I would think postmodernism is emic, and social science is etic.
You can ask, some people on the...
There are students who have joined us online from Chandigarh University campus and Punjab University, Patiala also. So if any of the students have any questions from the speaker.
you repeat the name of the book?
It was indeed great listening to you.
Evolution of Societies.
Victoria Morals. Which one?
Your own book.
Oh, happily. You will rescue me from obscurity. My book is called, I'll give the title without that coming to me. I'll tell you a little later.
Any observation or questions we are going to now? Yes.
Just a couple of observations. One was going to the real mic. Yes. So, a couple of observations. One was regarding when you were speaking about child labor being abolished. The mass of people were against it. Just Steve Jobs was once asked why he didn't conduct market research. And he said the same thing effectively. He said that people don't know what they want. So he put it in front of them. So he totally did as you were mentioning. The other aspect was, when we speak of modernity, and if you Google the word modernity, there are different definitions of it. And a lot of them reach back into the Western experience. For example, socio-cultural values arising from the Renaissance. And there's another one which says that modernity ended by World War II. And post-World War II, you were into a post-modern modernity era. So these are more in Western-centric. So can the word modernity exist with non-Western movements? That's one question. Can an African tribal, for example, be modern in the normal usage of the word?
Can I answer this straight away? When we were in college, the book that was a kind of a Bible for us, this is MA Sociology, was Srinivas's book, Westernization and Sensitization. And the question that he raised was, why did he use the term Westernization and not modernization? That was the question that he himself raised. Now, when I was looking at the subject, and he said the reason why he talked of Westernization was because he found it difficult to spot modernization clearly in India. Because he said modernization includes a psychic element, which is not there. So Westernization is all about things. You might remember Jalal Ahmed, who was an Iranian scholar. I'm actually singing his song. Jalal Ahmed said, this is pre-Shah of Iran, but not pre the application or the displacement of Shah of Iran. Jalal Ahmed said that what Iran suffers from during the Shah's period was what he called Westoxication. We were intoxicated by Western things, wearing short skirts and all those things. So he called it Westoxication, and I thought he said it was very bad. And I think for a similar reason, much around the same time, Srinivas decided not to talk about modernization, but Westernization in India, because he said that the modernization element was missing. Now you see, when you think in terms of the Enlightenment, for example, Enlightenment very often we look at it in terms of discoveries, scientific discoveries, right? But scientific discoveries are also a thing. What actually Renaissance did, not Renaissance, Enlightenment. Renaissance I don't consider to be modern at all. That's a different thing. It's not modern. What Enlightenment did was what I said earlier as Manhattan. It said, prove it to me. That element is the insertion of the Enlightenment. And I would think the Enlightenment is the first step that we took towards modernity. The other thing where we go wrong in this modernization, westernization is the very famous sociologist or political theorist called Shmuel Eichenstadt. Eichenstadt wrote about multiple modernities, and everybody cheered him along. And I found that notion fraught with difficulties. Because when he talked about multiple modernities, what he meant was, you can be modern your way, I can be modern my way. We're all modern. So he even thought that the terrorists in Afghanistan, wielding those guns, They were modern because they had those guns. They were technologically savvy, right? Now this is again a kind of an obsession with things. So if you're doing those things that's like technologically advanced, you're modern. If you know technologically advanced things, the brain is good at science, you're modern. It doesn't necessarily mean that. What important is, no matter how scientific your brain might be, in your relationship with people may be very unmodern. And that is really what counts. So in my frame of things, what is contemporaneous need not be modern. All that is contemporaneous need not be modern because now we're looking at modernity as a concept and not in terms of time. So Vidyasagar wasn't today, but what he did was modern, right? Today there's some people doing things and that's not modern, though it is contemporaneous. They're using guns, they know a lot about how to make dirty bombs, but that's not modern. So this is the way in which I would pose the question. The biggest, I think, filter is don't confuse, I would say, modernity with contemporaneity. Because happening today doesn't make it modern.
Friends, I have
You see this
one simple.
Husserl tribal people.
Yeah.
Husserl asked a question. He wrote a essay on it. He said, "I can teach geometry to Papuans, to Papua New Guinea. You know, that shows that they are as human as I am. I can't teach geometry to a monkey. You know."
Very simple, question. That in intersubjectivity, I want to understand the role of ideology. When we say the person have mind of his own but ideas of somebody else, and there the self and the other gets blurred. So I can easily give the example when you ask a poor person or a Dalit in a village, tell me your wishes. He'll say,
Your what?
wishes, 3 wishes. I am from World Bank. He says that he wants a hospital. I said, here it is. He wants a school. I say, here it is. He wants a Pakka road. I say, here it is. Will you send your child to school? No. Because he's asking, telling me all that because these are ideas of somebody else. He doesn't have livelihood. He can't send the school child to a school. So my basic problematic is that in intersubjectivity, the role of ideology becomes very important. And that starts from, I think, from unmodern and newer terminology to the modern. That keeps happening in different forms, in different ways, where the rights gets interpreted ethically, and ethic is defined, entirely differently.
No, it cannot. If it is modern, you can't have different understanding of ethics. You cannot have rights at the level of the community. Only individuals have rights. Communities have no rights. And if I'm asking for a school, because somebody else has told me, I don't think for the life of me that poor people are so swayed by other people. They think on their own. And sometimes they think incorrectly, may well be, but they think on their own. I have come across very poor people, actual BPL people, who send their children to a private school and they practically eat nothing. But they want a school because they think the future is. You have written about it also, about what is the way in which people look at the future in villages. And Professor Shahidul talked about, the difference between rural life and urban life, standard of living. You have to feel some standard of living in urban and rural. And you find that today the difference between standard, actually aspirations.
My question was the role of ideology.
Role of ideology depends.
That's the basic question I'm asking.
Ideology which
it may be the impact may be variant in different ways. That in some Kerala people may be interested in schooling or having better health facilities because the leadership was of that kind. But in Uttar Pradesh it may not be. That I understand.
Yeah.
Those variations. But I want there also again the role of ideology in Kerala, and here also the role of ideology. So I would like to understand in intersubjectivity, in relationships, the role of ideology. Whether relationship between worker and a capitalist, that's also, as you mentioned in the beginning, there is a relationship. Relation with father and a son or a daughter, there is a relationship. There is also role of ideology. And
you're right. There's ideology everywhere. There's no doubt about it. Now the real issue is, as I said earlier, where do I come from? I come from citizenship. I don't come from ideology. So I look at all ideologies through the optic of citizenship. So if you are whatever, if you have, shall we say, a racist ideology, and that racist ideology cannot be intersubjective. It's impossible. How can a racist ideology be intersubjective? How can I have a racist ideology where I say, yes, I should be the dominated black person? You don't have that kind of racist, it doesn't work. Identity politics cannot be intersubjective either. You've written about caste and identity politics.
You wrote on caste and saying that it is intersubjectivity where a person is mandated, the poor person or a lower caste, accepts his position.
No.
And
what
now
I
you are
said-
saying it's changing, I mean that's a different
No,
issue.
What I said was
Huh.
that the
I read
reason,
that.
the reason why caste seems so exotic
Yeah.
in the world, in the eyes of most people, is because most people believe the Brahmanical vision of caste, which is not the general vision, which is fragmented, there's no one vision. The Brahmanical vision is that people participate in their own subjugation. So poor, shall we say, Dalit will say, I'm destined to be like this is my fate, so I participate in my own subjugation. This is what Louis Dumont said famously. Michael Moffat, after him, wrote about the same thing in great detail. My argument has been that no caste, I've looked at the Jati origin of over 1,000 castes, no caste ever says that I deserve to be where I am. They all say, even the poorest Dalit caste will say, I'm a Brahmin who's been undone, or I'm a Kshatriya who lost a war because of betrayal, not because I lost a war, but betrayal, or I'm the son of the moon and the stars, sun basically, Surya Vamsha. And I am here because of some misfortune. My ancestor did something wrong. On many occasions, the gods can also be, very mercurial. So there's one community in Andhra Pradesh says that we were actually in the heavens doing whatever they do in heaven, playing golf or whatever. Then there was disorder on earth. So the god said, go down and bring it to order. We came down, we brought the thing to order, but then, unlike Star Wars, the gods didn't beam us back. So we are stuck. So nowhere, the stereotypical story of the leather workers is that we were, the most common, there are many versions, that we were once Brahmins, but we were betrayed by our brothers. So nobody says that I'm really low. And that, I think, is what is very important in phenomenology. If I put myself in the shoes of the other, and I say that I can't imagine myself a well-to-do middle class, upper caste Indian, accepting somebody else telling me that they're superior to me, then how can I accept those people accepting that I'm superior to them? This is intersubjectivity, isn't it? When my grandmother went to some temple in Bitur, I think, near Kanpur, they said, what caste are you? And Gupta is not understood in, because we are Bengali Guptas. We don't have money, we're not merchants. So we are what we call as Vaidus, which is doctors. And we say we are Brahmins, so we were trained and all that stuff. So when my granny went there, they asked her what her name was, and the chap said, you sit there in that line. And she was very upset. She said, I'm not like that. I don't belong to those other Vaishyas and Shudras. Right? She didn't understand that there are Vaishyas who think that they're very powerful. There's not one Banya community that says we are below X, Y, Z. They also say we are warriors. All the Banyas talk about warriors and kingship. So this is what. So once you see all these issues, put them in the forefront, you realize that this is what it is. If you are really going to study caste intersubjectively, ask yourself, would I like to admit that I am flawed, my bones are bad, my skin is bad, my substances are bad. If I can't accept it, why do they accept it? They won't accept it either. And sure enough, once you do this exercise, you find they don't accept it. When you don't do this exercise, then you believe the Brahmin story. Yagyavalkya Smriti, for example, says this happened to this happened because they intermarried. There was, Anulom and Pratilom, going wrong. So that is it. I think for a researcher, intersubjectivity is very important. Otherwise, you say poor people think like that. They have no brains, or they are caste ridden, or they're religious ridden. They're as caste ridden or whatever as we are. Which is why the argument today that I'd like to make is that what we don't have is a caste system, but what we do have is caste identity.
Just a moment. Actually, coming to my mind when you talked of Mahatma, kind of a pre-modern conception. And you think of Mahatma Gandhi. And I know that all of us know that Ambedkar quite was joked about it. Here's a person who is a Mahatma. And surely, as we say, that heroes are visible when the visibility is low. He was a Mahatma because the general run of society didn't have any sense of military. But he was at the same time thinking all the time of not the self and the other. So he was a Mahatma and also a modernizer, in a sense. What would you say to that?
Yes, I think Gandhi was a modernizer in many ways, but that is not my main point. Main point is, why did we need a Mahatma? Because as you said,
Quite right, yes.
modernizer and Gandhi, it's a very complicated topic about to me. Because Gandhi was a person who acted as a platform, with a foghorn of course, but a platform from where women became public figures. Because of Gandhi, on his shoulders, women entered public life. So in many ways, I mean, apart from anti-caste and all that stuff, in many ways he was doing things that were very modern. On the other hand, when I look at his Hind Swaraj, I find it very unmodern.
Quite right.
So he was a person. The person had feet of clay. As history should. The biggest lesson of history is to tell us that no matter how great a person, no matter how great an empire, they are all flawed. And Gandhi was a Mahatma at one level, which I admired him very much for. For example, when he was completely unflinching in non-violence. And showed tremendous courage. For example, when Suravardi was being attacked in Bengal, he stood alone. There was no support, there was no guard. He said, you want to get to Suravardi? I'm here. That was the kind of courage he had. But on other things, I'd say, well, I'm not so sure.
And also it comes to mind that today, the general run of people, because of the kind of direction given from Prof, have come to think that when India was great in the past, India has been the mother of democracy, and we are or we are going to be, we should be. And we also believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but we don't like our neighbor. We want to reach. Sorry.
You see, the thing really is, Professor Puri and I go back many, many years. It is because of this hospitality that we spent some many happy months in Punjab in the bad days. But what I wanted to say was, democracy is not really a Western concept, it's a modern concept. Because when democracy came to the West, it was stoutly opposed by people in the West. It was not something they embraced happily. It was a fraught moment.
My point was that if the general run of people and the leadership takes everything uncritically, not trying to prove, and people not asking them to prove.
People, the real thing is, as this story about democracy and leadership goes, the real thing is that it's not the people really. The way of they say people are great, people are noble. I'm not so sure.
Right.
It is how you mold them. And people must leaders take exceptional risks. It is very easy to be a theocrat. It's very easy to be a dictator. It's very easy to be a caste leader. It's very difficult to be a democrat. Because of intersubjectivity, it's very easy. Democracy is the hardest thing to put in practice. The most difficult thing, because it's so fragile. See, you have to ask that I see the world through your eyes is so artificial. It's so contrived.
Absolutely.
It's like a delicate plant in a hothouse. It doesn't come naturally. You have to force yourself and force others to think in that direction. It is very, very difficult.
Even the idea of fraternity actually.
Fraternity is this was Ambedkar wrote. The fraternity, I can have liberty and equality by law. I can say the law for liberty, law for equality. I cannot have a law for fraternity. Fraternity has to be nursed. We don't have laws. So democracy depends on fraternity, citizenship particularly. That is why most people think that I'm a look at all the dictatorships in the world.
That's right.
You know, they all call them republic of this or democratic that. They're not. And it gives the impression that democracy is so easy. Democracy is the most difficult thing, most hard to maintain, which is why democracy never moves forward in a linear fashion. It goes up, returns, goes up, steps back, goes up again. No? This back and forth movement happens because democracy is difficult. And if we accept citizenship and modernity, it should be our job to say, number one, democracy is not contemporaneous. Democracy is inter-subjectivity. Democracy is citizenship. And without these things, you cannot have modernity. No matter how many atom bombs
Do
you
we
make.
say that those people who try to be modern are also at the same time hypocrites?
Many of them were. Many of them were. That's true. Many of them were. But as I said earlier, nobody is perfectly modern. The moment you say I'm perfectly modern, you already become unmodern. You know? It's like Marx and Hegel. The biggest problem they have is because they said dialectic stops with us. That is what started. You know, because you said that you are top of theory.
Thank you, Professor Dipankar. Now I request Professor B.S. Gurman to conclude today's argument and vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, friends. We have all enjoyed Professor Dipankar Gupta's thought-provoking and penetrating presentation. His writings, particularly in the print media, discussion on electronic media, are always intellectual feast, and so was today's lecture. But difference of today's lecture is that it was meant for mass consumption rather than for sociologists in particular and social scientists in general. He has simplified the concept of modernization, which focuses not on things like organization, but on relationship like in a family. He made another observation: so long as it relates to things, it earns a bad name. But if it relates to relationship between or among people, it becomes good intellectual endeavor. Major feature while describing our modernity, according to him, is intersubjectivity, which attracted maximum questions in today's discussion. Intersubjectivity, according to him, separates ethics from morality, where ethics are public in nature and morality is private in nature. While describing the correlates of modernity, no Mahatma in modernity but are in pre-modern societies, as in India. Sports are governed by rules which results in innovations. Good manners are modernity, and he also made a statement that fashion is another distinguished feature of modernity. And he made another pertinent observation: citizenship confers equality status initially, but inequality takes place later on. And finally, he made a remarkable statement that modernity never ends. It's a continuous process. Therefore, the dialogue on modernity is continuing. It was reflected by the intelligent interventions by the participant. The participant did empirically prove that this modernity is a continuous dialogue. I, on behalf of IDC, express sincere thanks to Professor Dipankar Gupta ji for allowing us to reap the benefits of his scholarship, particularly on a very complex concept that is modernity, by citing examples from thinkers as well as from real life situations. I am also beholden to the audience for making the first Professor Randhir Singh Memorial Lecture series a grand success. Thank you very much.